Virgo, someone has arrived to change everything and will never be forgotten. There's someone you haven't met yet, or maybe you've met them without realizing it was them, who's going to do something no one else has been able to do to you. They're going to stay, not because you earned it through effort, not because you were helpful, available, indispensable. It will stay that way even when you unintentionally test her limits the way you test everyone else's limits, cataloging, suspicious, waiting for the hidden motive to appear. You think you already know how your own heart works. You think you've mapped out every defense, every pattern, every way to protect yourself before someone gets too close. But there's a specific type of presence that none of your defenses have been trained to recognize, because it asks for nothing, demands nothing, it just stays. And when you realize what's happening, it will be too late to turn back, because something inside you will have already changed in a way that can't be undone. This person didn't come to fix you. They came to show you a part of yourself that had been waiting silently for longer than you realize. There's something no one has told you about the way you love, Virgo. You think you know. You think you've mapped out every reaction of yours, every pattern, every way you surrender. But there's a specific moment, just one, when your entire internal architecture cracks in two, and you've never been able to explain it to anyone, because even you haven't quite understood what happened. And when someone arrives, not just anyone, you've met enough people to know that most pass by like wind through a closed door. You don't even notice. But every now and then, someone comes along who doesn't ask permission, who doesn't respect the orderly queue of your feelings. And your first instinct, the one no one sees, is to retreat, to catalog, to analyze their every gesture as if it were a piece of evidence. You do this with everyone, and it's defense, not coldness. You learned too early that feeling without understanding is dangerous. So before letting someone in, you need to dismantle that person piece by piece, understand the mechanism, predict the fall before it happens. But with this specific person, the mechanism doesn't work. The pieces don't fit together the way they always do. And that's where the crack begins. Because Virgo doesn't fear other people's chaos. Virgo fears its own chaos, the kind that hides behind organization, lists, and impeccable routines. And this person, without doing anything special, without shouting, without forcing anything, finds exactly the crack where this hidden chaos resides and enters. You'll try to distance yourself. You'll invent a technical reason, a scheduling conflict, a misinterpreted phrase, anything to justify retreating. But there's a part of you deep down that already knows. This isn't about her. It never was. It's about what she always awakens, something that's been there sleeping, waiting for years, maybe since childhood, a way of existing that you never had the courage to try. What if I told you that this discomfort you're feeling right now, this urge to run away and stay at the same time, isn't a bug in your system? And the system itself is trying to reorganize itself in real time. And that hurts. It hurts because for years, you functioned like a blacksmith working metal, controlled fire, precise hammer, each blow calculated to mold exactly the shape you decided needed to exist. You forged a version of yourself that can withstand disappointment, that can withstand abandonment, that doesn't break easily. And it worked. Until this person arrived carrying a kind of heat that none of your anvils were trained to receive. Because the blacksmith knows how to control the fire he himself ignites. The problem is when the fire comes from outside without asking permission and encounters a metal that was already hotter than you ever admitted. You'll notice the little things first, a way of laughing that disarms you before you even realize it. A casual phrase she said unintentionally that you'll repeat in your head for days, trying to decipher if it had a double meaning. You, who were always the first to notice the details in others, are now being noticed, being read, and that's almost unbearable, because it means losing control of the narrative you've always maintained about yourself. There's a question that will start to follow you quietly in the intervals of the day. It will appear when you least expect it, while washing dishes, driving, in the second before falling asleep. Why this person of all people? Why now? And most importantly, why do you, who have spent your whole life controlling who comes in and who stays, feel that this time there is no choice to be made, as if something much bigger had already decided this before you realized it, and the only thing left is to feel without needing to understand first, without categorizing, without predicting the fall before it happens. And for someone who lives analyzing every move before taking the next step, this seems almost impossible. It was while searching for answers to this that I found this digital book. The divine wisdom that guides your zodiac sign to a purposeful life doesn't come as just another list of generic advice you've heard 1,000 times. It comes as a mental attitude, a way to train exactly what Virgo already does better than any other sign: going deep. Only this time, going deep into yourself, instead of just going deep into others. And an invitation to stop analyzing love from afar and start inhabiting it, with all the mess that this can bring. You're reading this now, still with that question nagging at you. Why this person? Why now? This discomfort won't go away on its own. It only grows when ignored, and you know that better than anyone. The time to understand what's happening inside you is now, while the question is still alive, while the crack is still open. The link is in the first pinned comment, but be aware, this content may be taken down. Click now and download your copy, and leave one thing in the comments. What was the exact moment when you realized that this person had entered where no one else had managed to enter? There's a garden that only exists at night, inside you, and almost no one knows it exists. It's where you keep what you didn't have time to process during the day. Old resentments, fears you never verbalized, versions of yourself that were pruned too early to fit into some acceptable behavioral pattern. You tend to this garden alone, in the dark, watering what no one sees, because showing those roots seems too dangerous. But this person who arrived has a strange way of seeing in the dark. They don't need bright light to notice what's growing crooked inside. And that scares you more than any rejection ever has. Because you know how to process rejection, you have a protocol for that. But being seen in your entirety, including the parts you yourself avoid looking at, that has no protocol at all. There's a specific memory that lives in that garden, one you've never told anyone in its entirety, only in fragments, edited, always with a gentler ending than the real one. It's the memory of a time when you gave yourself completely, without calculating, without protecting anything, and the response you received was silence, or worse, indifference. Since then, you've learned never to water that specific part of the garden in front of anyone again. It grew crooked, hidden behind more presentable flower beds. You'll realize you're doing something you've never done before, leaving the garden gate ajar. Not wide open because that's not your style, but ajar enough to let in a little light from outside and illuminate a flower bed that's been neglected for years. And here comes the first contradiction that will truly bother you. You, who always believed that true love means deserving it through effort, through usefulness, through being indispensable, are being loved by someone who asked for none of that, who didn't make a list of demands, who simply stayed. This doesn't match the manual you wrote for yourself, and when something doesn't match the manual, Virgo's first reaction isn't to celebrate, it's to be suspicious. Why would this person stay without asking for anything in return? What kind of trap is this? You'll find yourself looking for the loophole, the hidden motive, the fine print that hasn't yet surfaced, reviewing every recent conversation in search of a clue that proves that deep down there's a price, because in your internal manual, everything has a price, especially genuine attention. But the more you search, the less you find. And that, for someone trained to always find the flaw before it hurts you, is disorienting in a way that no other experience had ever been. There's a luthier who spends his entire life adjusting the exact tension of each string, because he knows that too much tension breaks and too much tension produces no sound at all. You've unintentionally learned to live like this with people, adjusting proximity, testing tension, never letting anyone vibrate too freely near you. But this person doesn't ask to be adjusted. They simply sound in their own way, and the sound that comes out of it is more beautiful than any perfect tuning you've ever tried to control. And you begin to understand, still without clear words, that perhaps the problem was never about trusting others. Perhaps the problem was always about believing that you deserve to stay exactly as you are, without needing to adjust anything else. There's a small scene that will repeat itself, and that you'll carry with you for a long time. A comfortable silence between the two of you, without any rush to fill it with words, without that usual anxiety of needing to perform usefulness to justify your presence there. You, who always confused quietness with rejection, begin to discover that there is a quietness that is, in fact, the opposite of that. It's intimacy without demands. There's a cooper who builds barrels by tightening each wooden plank with metal hoops, piece by piece, until something is formed that can contain liquid without leaking a drop. For years you've built yourself up like that. Each protective layer fitted with precision, each hoop tightened, just enough so that nothing you feel leaks out in front of anyone. It worked. You never overflowed in front of anyone, never disappointed anyone with an untimely feeling, except that a barrel that's too tightly sealed doesn't allow anything to breathe. And wine that sits for too long without any contact with air never develops all the flavor it could have had. This person doesn't want to break into your barrel. They just stay nearby, waiting, while you decide, in your own time, to loosen one hoop at a time. And the first time you let an unfiltered feeling slip out in front of them, without editing, without polishing, something inside you awaits judgment. The judgment doesn't come. In its place comes a calm silence you've never felt before, a silence that demands nothing, that doesn't judge, that simply accepts what has overflowed. And it is precisely there that you understand. Perhaps protection was never the opposite of intimacy. Perhaps protection all along was just fear disguised as responsibility. There's a huge difference between being strong and being closed off. And for years, you've confused the two because no one taught you the distinction. Strength, you've always known how to exercise, enduring, solving problems, supporting others, even when no one asked if you also needed support. But openness is another skill, one that requires the opposite of control, and it's precisely this skill that this person is, without realizing it, teaching you to recover, not with speeches. Just by staying around long enough for your own body to learn that it's safe to relax the tight hoop that's been in place for so long. There's a tailor who never delivers a garment without first undoing the stitching 3 or 4 times, because for him, a crooked stitch ruins the entire piece. You're like that with the people you love. You mentally break the bond countless times, searching for the crooked stitch before accepting that perhaps the garment is already finished, already well made, already ready to be worn without further adjustments. But this time, every time you undo the stitching looking for the mistake, you only find another reason to trust. And that's scarier than finding a flaw, because it means the only thing stopping you from truly surrendering is yourself, holding the scissors, postponing the delivery of a piece that's been ready for much longer than you want to admit. Scissors in hand, that urge to undo what's already well stitched together just because it seems too good to be true. That has a name, and it's not caution. It's fear disguised as perfectionism. The book, The Divine Wisdom That Guides Your Zodiac Sign to a Purposeful Life, addresses exactly this point. It teaches Virgo to recognize when the instinct to endlessly revise no longer protects anything, only delays what already deserves to be lived. It's the turning point from delving deep into others to delving deep into oneself. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey toward the clarity and genius you deserve. There's a seed guardian who spends her life choosing from among thousands which seeds deserve to be preserved for the next season, because she knows that not everything that has bloomed once needs to be planted again. You do this with your own cherished memories. You keep some, discard others, and decide for yourself what from your story deserves to continue. And now you realize you're making a different choice than all the previous ones. You're not choosing to keep this person for utility, for fear of being alone, or out of habit. You're choosing because, for the first time, a seed seemed good enough to deserve the risk of being planted in new soil, even without any guarantee of a harvest. This shatters another old belief of yours, that you only plant what has already been tested, proven, and is safe. This person came with no guarantees whatsoever, and yet, for the first time, it didn't paralyze you. It moved you. And there's something liberating in that, something you're still learning to name. Not every seed needs certainty of harvest to deserve being planted. Sometimes the very act of planting, of risking new soil without any guarantee, is already the harvest. You spent so much time waiting for proof before allowing yourself to feel, that you forgot that feeling can also come first, without asking permission from any logic. Planting without a guarantee of harvest is the opposite of everything Virgo has been trained to do, and that is precisely why this move is both frightening and liberating at the same time. The book, The Divine Wisdom That Guides Your Zodiac Sign to a Purposeful Life, was created for those who are at this exact turning point, learning that depth is not synonymous with total control, and that there is genius in trusting even without a ready-made map. It gives you the mental foundation to sustain this choice without backing down at the first sign of uncertainty. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey toward the clarity and genius you deserve. An experienced firefighter learns something that seems contradictory. Sometimes, to contain a large fire, it's necessary to deliberately let a smaller area burn in a controlled manner to divert fuel from the larger fire. This is called controlled burning. And that's exactly what you'll need to do now with a part of yourself. There's a version of you that has spent years protecting itself so much that it's become fuel for its own fear. That belief that if you give yourself completely, little of you will be left when that person eventually leaves, as almost everyone has. That belief needs to burn away, not because it's easy to let go, but because as long as it exists, the bigger fire, the fear of never trusting anyone again, will continue to feed on it. It will hurt in the process. There will be nights when the urge to rebuild the old wall will be almost automatic, a reflex of years of practice. But every time you notice this reflex and choose not to obey it, something inside you becomes a little lighter, as if a weight you were carrying without realizing its size begins little by little to dissolve. And it is at that moment, exactly that moment, that you understand why that person will never be forgotten. Not because they put out the fire for you, but because they stayed close while you, with your own hands, learned to do the controlled burn that no one had been able to teach you before. Performing one's own controlled burn, letting go of a belief that no longer protects anything, is the hardest task a Virgo can undertake, because it means relinquishing control precisely when it seemed most necessary. There is an ice sculptor who works knowing, from the very first cut, that the work will not last. He polishes each detail with the same care as someone making something eternal, even knowing that the sun, sooner or later, will take it all away. And perhaps this is the most silent lesson that Virgo carries without realizing it. Beauty never depended on lasting forever. It always depended on having been made with truth while it existed. This person who arrived didn't come to fix you because you were never broken, just too closed off to perceive your own wholeness. They came to show you that there's another way to love besides deserving through effort, categorizing through distrust, protecting through distance, a way where you can simply be seen in your entirety without editing the parts you've always hidden. And that's why she'll never be forgotten, not because she promised to stay forever, but because, in the time she stayed, she taught you that your depth, the one you always used as a shield, can also be used as a bridge. And once a Virgo learns to build bridges instead of walls, the change never goes back. She silently becomes who you always were, beneath so much protection. Perhaps in a few years, you'll look back and not even be able to properly explain with exact words what changed. It will be more of a feeling than a list of events. The feeling that there was a before and an after, an exact point where you stopped organizing yourself to be bearable and began to simply exist, knowing that this was enough. And if someone asks when this change began, you'll probably smile quietly and remember a person who arrived unannounced, without asking permission, and who, in some way impossible to explain properly, never truly left, even though the time you spent together eventually ended. Because there is a presence that doesn't depend on physical proximity to continue existing. And that, Virgo, is the quietest and most powerful mark someone can leave on you, the tranquil certainty that you are always worthy of being loved without needing to deserve anything.